So welcome everyone to this month's Humpday Hangout. First Monday of every month, the International Society of Fire Service Instructors, as well as Traditions Training, get together and with fire engineering and talk everything fire service. This month we have a good cast of characters. I'll say cast of characters because they're all good guys from the ISFSI this month. And we're going to focus on company level training. So I'm just going to go around and Damon, everybody just give an introduction. We'll start with Damon Simmons.
Hey, good morning, folks. Good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you are. Damon Simmons, a member of the Oakland Fire Department.
Perfect. All right. Brian Gettemeyer.
Brian Gettemeyer. I'm a captain at Cowbell Fire Protection District, just outside St. Louis.
Perfect. Jesse, what do you got?
Jesse Marcotte. I'm the training coordinator for the Northville Township Fire Department, which is in beautiful metropolitan Detroit.
And definitely not last but not least, but our friend from the South, Chief Shaw, what do you got?
Hey there, my name is Steve Shaw. I'm the Assistant Chief for EMS and Training in Fort Lauderdale Fire Rescue. Happy to be on today.
Perfect. And I'm Brian Zaitz, Assistant Chief out here in Kirkwood in St. Louis, Missouri, and a first Vice President of the International Society of Fire Service Instructors. So honored to be with you guys today. We're gonna have a good show. I want to take a few moments before we get started here today to talk about FDIC. It seems like just about a few months ago we were at FDIC, and hard to believe, but submissions are in and class selections are going underway with the board. So should be getting some notifications here probably the next couple months, I would imagine, month or 2 months, as to what's going to be available, and signups will be shortly after that. So if you have not been to FDIC before, make sure you get on that open enrollment when it opens, because classes do fill up very quickly, especially those hands-on training classes Monday, Tuesday. So get on board, get signed up, and come up to a great week. If you've been before, you obviously know what it's all about. And so we encourage you to definitely sign back up and come back up and visit us. I will definitely be there one way or another. It's going to be a great week again. So I'm sure all you guys will be there as well. So we'll get that going. So today we're going to talk company level training. If you guys were on for the June show, when we had the Humpday Hangout in June, you guys remember we talked about training in general, and company level training and the importance of company level training. And we kind of want to hone in on that today and really focus in on what it is that we want to do at company levels, and, building a better drill. And the goal of today is, we kind of talked before the show, we want you guys to leave with tangibles. So if you're listening today, we don't want you leaving in an hour from now saying, oh, that was a great talk, and I got some nuggets, but actually leaving today with some training drills that you can take back to your company tomorrow or whenever you're back on shift, and truly implement and make yourself a more efficient and safer company. So but let's recap what we did in June. So Chief Shaw, you got anything from June? You were on that show. Highlights?
Well, I think just over 30,000 foot view, I think that you hit the nail on the head when you talk about basically speaking to the audience, speaking to the people who are listening, providing value. In other words, when they get done listening to the show, what are they walking away with? And I think that's going forward, everything we're talking about today, that's kind of what we're focusing on. In other words, what are we doing? But also those tactical takeaways, which I think is the biggest thing right now. Between all of us on the bandwidth today, I think we cover a good part of the country at this point. So I'm looking forward to exchanging notes again and diving a little bit deeper into things that people can walk away with.
I think that's key too. We talked in June, like I said, we were pretty broad spectrum on stuff and the importance of company training. I think we all at that conversation all agreed that obviously company training was critical to us, to the success of any organization, and it's critical to success on the fire ground. So but using this next hour to really get some skill drills that are going to make us better. Jesse, you're in training. Well, we're all in training, but Jesse, you're in training out there, the Detroit area. What do you think about the company level training that we had?
Yeah, that company level training, I had the opportunity to watch that last Humpday Hangout that you did in June. And I thought there were a lot of things that made perfect sense during that last Humpday Hangout. So one of the things I thought was really fitting was that company level training is the bedrock of the fire service. So I know that was one of the things that you guys talked about. And then even with some of the stuff that Chief Simmons is working on in the Oakland Fire Department, in terms of all the company officers having that Instructor One certification, that's actually very similar to a movement here in the state of Michigan, where we just recently adapted, I should say, our company officer curriculum to be more fitting with NFPA 1021, to include that requirement that all of our new fire officers in the state of Michigan have that Fire Instructor One certification. And then moving forward, if somebody's if they already have that Officer 1 certification before they get Officer 2, they have to go back and button up that Instructor 1 certification. So I think initially people were saying, hey, like, what do I need this for? But then when you dial back into what those core duties of that company officer are and what it means to set the tone, training and education is a lot of times where that tone can be set in terms of crew preparedness and crew effectiveness.
Absolutely. Damon, what do you got thoughts on that? You were on the last show with us. What are you thinking?
Yeah, just to recap and not to sound too preachy, in the fire service, that company officer, he or she is the most influential position. And when you tie that into the importance of training and education and how training and education serves as a foundation for our success. And when we say success, we're not only talking about mitigating the emergency, putting a fire out, providing medical care, hazmat, but also making sure that the men and women go home in the same capacity that they came to work. When you tie those two together, we cannot overemphasize the importance of training and education and how that company officer, he or she, is instrumental in that what should be a daily activity in fire stations all across the world.
Yeah, 100% agree. You know, I've one of the things I do at FDIC all the time is that leadership on company officer success, and I always tell in that class, you know, the company officer, you know, and it's the truth, is they're the oars and the motor for the organization. And if they're not firing on all cylinders, your organization's just going to go in circles. So you got to have strong company officers, and I agree. You know, a strong foundation starts with success. So we'll talk to Brian Gettemeyer here. He's a company officer in Cottleville. So Brian, as a company officer doing company training, you know, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm a little bit more agile because I'm with the company, right? So I'm there at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and sitting in the chair watching a game or something at night. We're just always talking about whatever. So you know, I can cater directly to the needs of my company because the guys are saying, hey, I think we fell a little short, or I saw this on an article, or I saw this in a class. So for me as company officer, it's a little easier to adjust on the fly to tailor something for what my members need directly, because I'm there, I'm with them 24/7. So
you know, there's a phenomenal point that got brought up right there, was that needs analysis from the company officer perspective. And I think, you know, as a training officer myself, you know, I can develop any trainings I want. And I can base those off of, you know, the big incidents, right, that we find ourselves as chief officers on. But a lot of times it's the small things that lead to those big incidents, right? So that company officer being able to conduct that needs analysis and develop and tailor those trainings to the individual company needs is absolutely critical. That's a great point, Brian. Thank you. All right, so let's get started with the show. We want to really dive into this, and I think let's dive in. We'll start with Jesse. And you know, what's your company level training? What's the drill, the skill drill that you think is critical for our guys to take away? Guys and gals that are listening right now, they're going to go tomorrow and they're going to say, "Hey, man, that Chief Marcotte, that training that he talked about, that was phenomenal."
You know, I was hoping I'd get to go first. So
I knew you were.
Thank you for that. Yeah. But the thing I'd like to talk about today is actually thermal imaging cameras. So a thermal imaging camera, right, they've been around the last 20 years. And sometimes it's that thing on the truck that we know it's there, but we don't always realize the full potential of that, or we don't realize the limitations of that piece of equipment. And the combination of those two things, not understanding the full use of it, and then not understanding those limitations, sometimes can set us up in a bad situation. So even though it's something on the truck that we check every day, it's a really neat opportunity to fine tune some skills and to build some conversation. And it also dovetails into some other areas that I really like, such as building construction. So it's basically a 4-phase drill or 4-part drill. And this is one of the drills that we were really trying to facilitate with the understanding and fighting understanding and fighting basement fires, hands-on training that we conducted with ISFSI. So a lot of this is information that's come from other places, whether it's Jake Barnes or Mike McCarthy out in Boston. But essentially, what we like to do with the thermal imaging cameras is, number one, consider our resources, right? So for the company officer, we're conducting training on shift. We're considering those resources both from a time perspective and then a budget perspective as well. in addition to whatever training props or items that would be needed to facilitate this. So what I like about this particular drill is it's minimally invasive with respect to those types of resources. And then we can blend some other things together, use some very basic props that, again, with the budget in mind, cost for the most part $0. There are things you either have at your fire station, or there are things that you could easily retrieve probably in your first due area by doing some company walkthroughs, which I know Chief Shaw referred to that with building construction in the June edition of this. So that being said, the three big things that I think are really useful for this thermal imaging drill, if you're to conduct it back in your location, are number one, we start outside with, or inside our apparatus bay for that matter, depending on the weather, whether it's too hot, too cold, windy, snowy, etc. But we basically just we start with a conversation on the thermal imaging cameras, whatever thermal imaging cameras are present that day in that station. We have those out, whether it's a situational type of thermal imaging camera that looks kind of like your phone, right, the little guy, or your full-blown tactical thermal imaging camera that you're carrying on your engines or ladders or rescues. And then we just have that conversation on the difference between tactical and situational thermal imaging cameras and what they're used for, and the limitations of both of those particular devices. And then that kind of gets us into the modes of the thermal imaging camera. So a lot of times feedback that we receive is, hey, we use this thermal imaging camera on an incident and it started to freeze. Or before I know, like 1 second, everything was gray, then everything's in color, then it's back to gray. What's going on with this camera? So just understanding the different modes, or if we have a camera that has even more modes than your standard, fire / search mode, how do we understand those different modes? And then selecting those modes with a gloved hand. Very basic, but sometimes as we're moving around, calling around a structure, it's easy to take that camera from one mode to the next, to the next, to the next. And then things are looking really sensitive because we've ended up in a different feature of the camera. So first part of this is really understanding the camera you're using, what modes are available on that camera, right? And then how do you cycle between those modes? Because that's really only an advantage to have all those modes if you understand what that mode can be used for, and then how to get in and out of that mode. Whether it's something simple as pointing the camera back down at the ground and letting it reset for a second, and then scanning the room again, or the manual manipulation and getting to those other features in the camera. So that's the first part that we like to start with, is just talking about the cameras themselves and the modes. And then I think the next logical progression is actually to start with the limitations of a thermal imaging camera, because this helps dispel some things before we get too far into the drill and as things escalate. So using some very simple props within our organization, things that are, again, either free or readily available within any fire station, probably in North America. The first one I will start with is a super basic prop that, again, is very basic in terms of understanding the limitations of this camera. So this one is just carpet padding, or sorry, a piece of carpet, some carpet padding, and then our actual OSB here. So that being said, on the back end of this, we can label this. This is straight from a slide from the UL presentation on structural stability of engineered lumber and fire conditions. And it's just showing that basically the top of the carpet could be 85 degrees. It's not an adequate or accurate predictor of collapse for structural imaging, or for structural collapse, because that bottom of that floor assembly could be almost 1300 degrees. So it's just a very basic thing that each station can have at their disposal. But basically, we do the limitations. We do a cold room exercise to go over depth perception, tool location, field of view, just switching the camera, changing the profile of that, and then integrating a burn barrel into that as well behind the station, and showing convective flow and some other things we'd be looking for, whether we're interior as a crew operating inside of a structure, or we're that incident commander doing the 360 on the exterior of the structure.
I think that's phenomenal. One of the things I was talking to, it's funny you mentioned Mike McCarthy. I was just talking to him this week. Actually, I was talking email with him. And he said he starts out every one of those trainings by taking a alcohol wipe to the lens of those thermal imagers, because it's just how dirty they are, and people don't pay attention to that. So I guess the question I'd have is, like, to the group, I look at Jesse's office, right? And the first thing I see is, my picture's not on the wall, so that's probably an issue. I'll get you some pictures of me. But firehouses nowadays, right? Like, you look at the construction stuff, how important those props are to have in stations to facilitate company training. If nothing else, it's just a walk by. Jesse's got the prop there for the floor stuff, and obviously relates to the thermal imaging and things like that. But how critical, just go around the horn. I mean, is that stuff that you guys have readily available in your stations? And it shouldn't come from us, right? It should come from the companies. They should be picking this stuff up and want to do this at the company level. Thoughts from you guys? Brian, are you at the company level out there in Cotterville? Got stuff like that laying around?
Not quite the war chest. We got some stuff in the basement, but we're trying to acquire some more. So
Yeah.
Slowly but surely. I got some new ideas from Jesse today, so I'll be at the carpet store tomorrow when we go back to shift.
What's up? I was gonna say we got Chief Shaw here. What's a basement? What's snow? Yeah, he's got the rough life, doesn't he? No, I think that's critical though. I think, the thermal imaging training, we're getting ready to do that here in Kirkwood in August. We're going to do some tactical thermal imaging training similar to what we do with the basement fire stuff. And I think, to Jesse's point on that stuff is, it's one of those tools that got thrown on a truck and maybe we didn't do enough training on it initially. And how many new guys we get on the job and we say, hey, there's a thermal imager either in the back step now. And, the training they got may have been very minimal at the academy. So I think that's a great thing. And, Jesse's point of, this is done at the company station. I mean, that's phenomenal. So any comments on that training, guys? Any thoughts, additions, comments, concerns?
Just one comment to the thermal imager. I don't want to take too much time, but I was talking to somebody about this recently, and we were saying that I think most of us, or a lot of us, carry thermal imagers. One of the comments was made recently after a class that one of our folk had taken was that, I thought I knew how to use a thermal imager. But after I took a class, after about 3 to 4 hours, they realized, oh my gosh, I had no idea how to use a thermal imager. So just as a side note, I'm glad you brought that up. It's one of those things that if you haven't trained on one of those in a long time, or have never gotten training, which happens all the time, you just get in the truck and it happens to be there, it's time for you to go to take a class and get some education, because you'd be surprised. People will be surprised what they don't know about that thermal imager.
Yeah, 100% agree. It's one of those tools, we use it a lot, but we don't use maybe the technical aspects of it to the best of our abilities. It's one of those things we turn on and we look for the person, and that's about it. So, all right, Damon, let's go to you, sir. What do you think? What's your company training for us today?
So I'm going to apologize in advance because I know in many parts of the country they don't necessarily have high-rise buildings, but in the city of Oakland and a lot of major cities, not only in the West Coast, well, major cities and suburbs on the West Coast and throughout, we have high-rise structures. And I tell folks all the time, if you go back and look at the history of high-rise fires, at least in the modern era, there are at least 1 to 2, if not 3 generations of firefighters in the fire service who have never been to a high-rise fire. And in a lot of sense, that's a good thing, because our first responsibility as professional firefighters is to prevent harm from happening. But as we all know, if you talk about those infrequently involved activities or types of calls, when they do occur, oftentimes we rise to the occasion, but in most situations we fall back on what we used to. In our particular organization, and this is not to cast any blame, but definitely a lesson learned, we had a high-rise incident about 2 months ago. And fortunately, because of the training and education that a young man had received through our safety and survival training, it was instrumental in not only saving his life, but also the life of 2 other firefighters. So with that being said, one of the things that I would offer that for those of us out there who have mid-rise and high-rise structures in our district, I would encourage you to involve yourself in some type of high-rise training and education. And step number 1, if your department has a high-rise policy, review that high-rise policy. It sounds elementary in nature, but as we all know, oftentimes we hear from our folks, I didn't know we had a policy. I don't understand why this is in that policy, why that's not in there. But number 1, review the policy. And then step number 2, as it relates to high-rise training and education, I would suggest or encourage company officers to break it down by modules. And what I mean by modules, module number 1 or phase number 1, whatever you want to label it as, talk about the response phase. What does that look like? Module number 2, talk about fire attack operations. And within fire attack operations, tie in fire protection systems. As we all know, as a result of One Meridian Plaza, and prior to 1993, we have pre-93 and we have post-93 as it relates to standpipe systems. Post-93, any high-rise structure where your static pressure is greater than 175 is required to have some type of pressure regulating device in place. What does that mean, company officers? Is making sure your engineers understand that. So when you have that high-rise fire on the 25th floor in a building where there's a pressure regulating device in place, they're pumping to what we call system design pressure and not using those basic calculations that we use day in and day out. Part 3 of that high-rise training and education focuses on search and rescue. What does that look like in a high-rise structure? What do we want to emphasize? For example, in a single-family dwelling, it's common for us to, when we're performing search, bring all your occupants and victims out. But if you got a 30-story building and the fire is on the 5th floor at 3 o'clock in the morning, and that happens to be a senior living facility, do you want 30 floors of individuals out in the elements when it's 25 degrees outside? Absolutely not. So talk about the when and why we move victims or occupants, shelter in place, move them to another floor versus removing them from outside of the structure. Part 4 of that high-rise training and education revolves around ground support. I tell my guys all the time that the men and women I work with, single family dwelling, we pull up, less than 10 to 15 seconds, we got water on the fire. If we need a pike pole or axe or something, take us about 10 to 15 seconds to go out to the rig, retrieve and go back inside. Fire's on the 30th floor. It's not that easy in regards to going back to the rig and retrieving items. So that would be a recipe that I would offer to those of us out there who have high-rise structures in our communities, is to break it down into modules: fire attack, fire protection systems, search and rescue, ground support, lobby control, elevators, how the elevators work, phase 1 versus phase 2. Now, we know in most high-rise buildings, we can't go in there and flow water, and that's okay. But those other elements that are important to our success are equally important as well.
I think it's great. I'm taking notes here as we're talking. To break it down, if you don't have high-rise, it doesn't matter. Get into any building in your city, your community, and learn about their suppression systems, their fire alarm systems, and those sort of things. But in terms of high-rise, I like your idea of breaking it into modules. First company, second company, third company. What's going to happen? And I think from my perspective, at least, the mark of get out that policy and SOG first. As the company officer, you got to be the expert on that to start with, and share it with your company so that everybody's on the same page. We don't have a whole lot of high rise here in Kirkwood, but we do know we have some 4 and 5 story buildings, and they, for us, that takes quite a few companies to facilitate some type of fire attack. So,
and Brian, as part of that, getting out and reviewing that policy as company officers emphasizes the importance of following that policy and discussing the why of the policy. Why do we do this? Why do we not do that? That's important just as well under the mantra or concept of discipline or hazard zone discipline.
Thoughts from the other guys on the high rise? Anybody do anything like that with their company level training, having success? Even if you don't have high rise, going to buildings and just at least talking through some SOGs and that sort of stuff.
I don't know if it's the same with any of y'all, but right now when I look out my window, we're in a massive construction boom right now. Everything, all of our single story old apartment complexes or houses or businesses are turning into 25, 30 story high rises right in front of us. So when we talk about high rise, you're right, Damon, in terms of reviewing those high rise procedures, making sure we're prepared for it. As much as we're doing training right now, that's one of the things that I wouldn't say keeps me up at night, because we're pretty good at what we do. We have the tools and equipment to tackle those emergencies. But yeah, when it comes to high rises, those are some animals, and you have to have a solid plan when you're attacking those. So, but again, I look at my window, that's what I think about these days is how many more high rises we're going to and how much more training we need to encompass that.
It's got to be pretty rough looking out your window at Fort Lauderdale every day. I mean,
It's horrible. It's absolutely horrible.
I
Yes.
can't even imagine how bad it's got. Or Oakland, I'm thinking to myself, like Jesse, Brian, and myself, what are we doing? What do we do wrong to not have those views? Oh, fantastic. All right. So we got 2 down. We're cranking right through this. This is fantastic. I think we got some takeaways for the listeners today, which is great. Gedemeyer, let's go to you. What are you thinking for company level training?
So I'm doing size up training right now. So our department's kind of in a unique spot. So we have 56 members total on the line, but 27 of us are eligible to retire in the next 7 years, which includes all 3 battalion chiefs and 11 out of 12 of the captains. So we've got a lot of young guys that are coming up through the ranks and want to start doing acting captain stuff. So we've been doing size up training with them. So kind of started in COVID. We were doing some sets and reps, pulling up some slides, everybody standing in their engine house, but doing size up on the radio and projecting stuff up via Zoom. But then recently, we had the opportunity, we got 2 acquired structures the day before they were going to be wrecked. So the decision by the battalion chief was, let's just run the companies out, let the new company officers do a size up on an actual building. And that was quite the learning experience for those young company officers. It's a lot different getting out of the truck and stepping on the grass instead of the concrete at the training tower, and coming out with your SCBA and getting your tools and your backstep guys going, what do you want me to do? So it gave them a chance to do a windshield size up, do a 360, deploy the tactic, and then we could flow water inside the house. So it was great. So they went inside, they flowed water, but when they came out, one of the guys came up to me, he's like, that was way harder than I thought it was going to be. Because he was doing great in the classroom. And when we were in the classroom, in that sterile environment, he was doing solid size ups. It's just a little bit more challenging when you come off the truck with the SCBA. So, but you wouldn't have to do this at an acquired structure like the flow. Brian, you live in my fire district. I could come over to your house and ask you permission to do one quick lap around your house and do a 360 size up and let it be that. Or say, hey, do you mind if I pull a hand line to your backyard? I'm not going to tear anything up, but to get the company to have a line off and say, all right, this is what we're doing next to prepare for that entry. So, it changed it up, and I think it was just really made it solid. And what we're seeing that when those guys are riding the seat. We just had one of our acting captains get first in on a working fire the other day, and solid size ups. His actual first fire. He's had 2 in the last 2 months, and his size ups are right on. And it's those sets and reps, I think.
I think it's Tony Carroll's usually on these things, and everybody knows Tony. They call him the dentist because he loves the drill, and I think that sometimes we lose sight of that in the fire services, that sets and reps, like Brian says there, just continue like, okay, let's do it again. And, you look at professional athletes, they practice for hours on end every week for, a 2 or 3 hour game. But they have to, right? They have to be that good. I like that. I think, beyond the size up, I think that situation that's facing Cotterville is probably facing a lot of fire districts, fire departments across the country, a lot of senior members retiring. The transitions occurring in the fire service with younger generations coming up and taking in the officer roles, chief officer roles, company officer roles, and the wealth of knowledge in those senior members. We want to make sure it doesn't just walk out that door, right? We got to share everything. But I like that. To Brian's point, we started doing some stuff like that here at Kirkwood, was some sets and reps with some size ups and taking pictures of actual buildings and using some digital software and things like that, so that our buildings were on fire instead of, not that Oakland's fires are different, but it's a little bit more realistic when there's no cactus or palm trees in the background, for our guys to actually, be like, oh, this isn't true. This would never happen in our town. No sand on the beach or anything like that, like Chief Shaw's got, or, the ocean in the background, like the mine's got, or anything like that. So a little different, but yeah, thoughts on that one, guys? I like that one a lot. I like that a lot. So let's add on to that if we, yeah, Jesse.
Yeah, that's I think sets and reps is such a big part of practice, and getting outside of the station, as Brian was alluding to, and seeing some actual buildings in person. One of the things that we did, we're in a very similar situation. 90% of our command staff can retire in the next 5 years. So one of the things we've done is we've transitioned to all of our initial arriving crews, whether they're on an ambulance or not, regardless of seniority, they're all giving the size up and assuming command. And I think that's helping systemically. But one of the things that we talked about with a training very similar to this is a senior member who's a senior firefighter who operates in the company officer position quite a bit. We did a slow roll training, so to speak. So like in Detroit, they'll do like slow roll Detroit. You ride your bicycle through the city of Detroit and you look at all the different buildings and everything. So we kind of adapted that back to our organization where we slow rolled the township. And one person sits in the officer seat of the engine, picks out 5 different locations. We drive to that location. We get on scene, we call the size up, we give the first couple minutes of the orders, identify the water supply, and then we do that and we switch. And then guys are getting those sets and reps, both driving in that first due area, as well as giving the initial radio report on a real building. And then you can mix in different things like cul-de-sacs and extended setbacks and all this other stuff, residential, commercial, institutional, all that kind of thing. So that slow roll idea is a fun way to do that as well.
I like that. Demond or Steven, anything?
Yeah, there was a comment that was placed in the chat box about all firefighting is local. And I like that. And my takeaway from that and what I offer to you as company officers who are listening or who will be listening in a later date is that when you are designing your curriculum for your training and education at the company level, base it on what's in your district, base it on what's in your organization. If you work for a small suburban fire department and you don't have 80 to 90 high-rise structures in your system, your city, you don't have a large port, you don't have an underground subway system, that's okay. Select training and education that's appropriate to your department and more so your jurisdiction. All firefighting is local. That's my takeaway from that.
Yeah, Shaw, what you want to add to that? It was kind of your comment there about the local.
I think that was quoted by Bill Carey, said all firefighting is local. And I think that I think about that comment all the time. And I think everybody who's listening to this, every firefighter, every officer, every chief should be thinking about that on a regular basis, that all firefighting is local. What I have in Fort Lauderdale is different than what you guys have in your neck of the woods and vice versa. So, you have to be the best at what you do. Well, what do? I deal with certain types of structures and situations and whatnot that you guys may not have and vice versa. We have to be as best as we can at what we do. Acquired structures, if you have that ability to maximize that, is huge. Even if you don't get to burn them, even if you don't get to do all the training you get to do inside them, knowing your construction, knowing what's going on, knowing how those rooms are situated and how they're broken down, there's so much value in that in terms of acquired structure. So I was going to talk a little bit about that a little later on, but I'm a big fan of acquired structure. I'm a big fan of knowing your first due, really knowing your first due. I love the company officers that know their first due so well that when newer folk come to their stations, they have specific drills based on their first due response zones, whether that's a certain structure, a certain territory, a certain whatever. It shows ownership, it shows pride, it shows really in-depth knowledge of their area. So, in terms of what we're talking about, in terms of company officer training, as much as, I see things from a variety of standpoints, from the training bureau side and the support side on that, I love it when the company officers take a lot of pride in their own zones and own territories and own stations and make sure they know what they're doing prior to they get there. As Billy Goldfeather says, it's not the first date when you go to certain structures, So.
All right.
Brian, just one more thing with that, when you were talking about putting out pictures and going around Kirkwood, something that we've done even is just to use a real estate site like a Zillow or something like that, pick out houses in my district. You can usually get 3 or 4 sides of those. And then you can really even take that one step farther if you wanted to go inside and say, hey, what do you try to line up the outside windows to where the bedrooms are, or in our case, does it have a basement, and kind of putting some of that stuff through the real estate house, through the real estate side. I can essentially walk through the house and not be there. So if it's a snowy day or a rainy day and we're staying in quarters, that's an option to do too.
Jesse, Jesse's got a good construction background. So Jesse, I would tag on to you. So what's some additional tips you would have for us? Like relative to that company training, right? So like the takeaways of, in my head, I'm just thinking like, today's generation doesn't have the same construction knowledge that it did 20 years ago. And so the stuff that maybe we take for granted that, there's a vent underneath a window, how do doors swing, those are the simple things that I think sometimes doesn't get passed along. But Jesse, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so that's a great point. And my thoughts on that, to be fair, the reason I learned about building construction is because I knew nothing about it. And my lack of knowledge regarding building construction almost ended in a really bad situation, ironically on a basement fire. So being a part of that program was personal to me because I learned a lot from that particular instance. So with that being said, from a building construction standpoint, we try to identify those things on those slow roll kind of deals, or by identification of photos in our area, whether it's through like a real estate app or other photos that we accumulate. But just paying attention to the windows, the era the building was built. Most of our community was built post 1980. So we have a lot of lightweight building construction, but one of the simple ways that we try to reinforce that is through like a scavenger hunt kind of deal, right? So sometimes it's a pretty formal scavenger hunt where it's loaded into like an iPad, and they stop at a building or a hotel under construction, they identify a beam, a girder, a truss, and then they snap a photo of it while they're out there. And then we have an accumulation, like a stockpile of those types of construction features. The other thing I like to do is my own scavenger hunt, kind of like a Sanford and Son kind of deal, where I drive out to these construction sites and ask if I can basically have their scraps. So a quick company officer drill on that one is, two different construction features. Again, the markers cost more than the prop itself because this is garbage. And if they don't have to clean it up at the end of the day, better for them. But basically, if you just hand this out at your roll call meeting, it can be blank and you ask one person, or you ask everybody to write one fact down about that prop, right? This is just a simple TJI. And people might not know it off the top of their head, but you've alluded to some generational differences. One thing that all generations are pretty competent with is using their phone, and everybody knows how to spell Google. So with that being said, if you just Googled anything about building service fire construction or TJI or floor joists or basement fire or whatever, you'd find a lot of information. So you pass that around. This is just another little prop that we picked up. This is from a class recently that we did on building construction in Ohio, actually. But basically just naming these features. What is a gusset plate? What is a truss? What's a top cord, bottom cord, web? Why do we need to know that? How do we interpret those things? So again, at the end of the day, you go over everybody's comments, and now we're that much further ahead with our understanding of building construction, and it costs us $0.
Hey, Brian, I got a quick comment.
Yes, sir.
And this is telling of Jesse's character. I'm a little biased because both he and I are from Michigan. So
Sure.
I'm always, but company officers out there, Jesse just made a comment in regards to initially a lack of knowledge that he had from the perspective of building construction. And so what I offer to you again is that as company officers, it's a lot that you don't know. And those areas where you are deficient, do your homework, pick up a book, go online. There's a lot of great stuff out there, not only in building construction, but fire dynamics, engine company operations, truck company operations to shore yourself up. Second takeaway from that is that use your resources. Other folks, you may have a firefighter who he or she has a strong construction background. Let him or her give that class or that discussion, that tailboard discussion, in this case on building construction. And then number three, and I hear this a lot from individuals who I talk to about becoming company officers, and they say, well, I'm not ready yet. I still have a lot to learning to do. And that's true. Just because you receive that first bugle or second bugle, that does not mean that does not mean that you know everything. This profession requires you to be a lifelong learner. So that really stood out to me when Jesse made that comment because of an incident, because of a lack of building construction background that he had. It led him to go down that road of increasing his knowledge. And that's a sign of a good firefighter. That's a sign of a good company officer when he or she identifies their deficiencies and they go out and do something to correct those deficiencies or gaps. Probably better terminology to use. Thank you, Jesse.
Good stuff. All right. The one and only Chief Shaw, what do you got for us?
Well, the problem with this show is that as we're going through this and we're taking all these notes and whatnot, is want to talk about so much. So the challenge is trying to just narrow it down for the time frame allotted. So since we're talking about company drills, one of the things that our training bureau right now is really focused on is RIT training. And a couple things that we've done years ago, we started off doing a lot of RIT training several years ago when we had a RIT competition team. Our RIT competition team is some of the most energetic, enthusiastic, just solid folk we have in the fire department, and they're rock stars, just humble, accountable, but they train all the time. They develop their own training prop that mimics the Florida one that they use at the conference they train at. And what we did as a training bureau is we collaborated with them. So this is a few years back. We collaborated with them to let the whole department utilize their prop, using them as some of the instructors. So it was a great collaboration. The training bureau got to go out there and we got to run multiple people in through night drills using their RIT prop. Since then, the new training chief, Mike, right now, he's gone to the next level. And what he has done, and again, with collaboration, he's collaborated with the logistics bureau and collaborated with the department to upgrade some of our engines to be squad type engines. And the ultimate goal being those squads will respond to a structure fire as a RIT team itself, just a dedicated RIT team. We're not there yet, but that's the plan going forward. And, even before I go into that detail, you can't do these things without support. I got to tell you, our fire chief, she is awesome. She supports the training bureau like nobody else has in 110 years of history, and our department has. And we're doing things that we never had before, but you need that higher level support. So we're blessed to have that support from high. Anyway, Damon, you mentioned in terms of modules. I'll go into the next phase of that and talk about phases. What Chief of Training right now is doing is RIT training in phases. The first phase was to take those companies that have those squad engines and give them a 40-hour, the first ever done in our department, a 40-hour RIT course specifically for them, covering everything from self-rescue all the way through live fire scenarios, rescuing mannequins and such. A lot of hands-on, a lot of reps, a lot of time. There's still plans to get everybody through that, but the next phase, which we're already starting on during our night drills, is RIT operations for everybody else out there, all the operations people. And those are happening in night drills right now. So again, self-rescue, carries, unpackaging, the whole 9 yards. And there's a lot of RIT's getting a lot of good play time out there, and we're taking advantage of that right now. So between the support we have, between all the data that's showing that the RIT that's going on out there, and between the need for it, that's where our department's working on right now. We have quite frankly a cat's ass program right now. It's impressive. But what I wanted to say something about, kind of veering off subjects a little bit, is going back to that firefighting is local type thing. We were just talking about a bunch of things, and Jesse, I think you mentioned it. You had gone by someplace and asked a question. You had gone by someplace and said, hey, can I have that or whatever? I think that I want to make sure I say this at least once or maybe twice, whatever. You never know what you get until you ask. You never know what you get until you ask. So kind of on the same token as what Jesse was talking about, when I started in training over a decade ago, and I think that you guys probably know one of my passion projects, cutting up overhead doors with rotary saws. Everybody's got their thing. Some people like fishing, some people like hunting. I like chopping things up with rotary saws. I don't know why, I just do. Anyway, so a decade ago, when I first got into training, I decided to go by one of our local overhead door shops and said, hey, do you have any doors we can cut? And from that day till today, about a decade now, that gentleman at that company, EDL Doors, gives us all their old residential garage doors, the reinforced ones that we deal with in South Florida, and lets us train on them. I can call him up anytime, he'll save some doors and we go cut them. It's a beautiful public-private partnership specific to our area because that's what we deal with. So in talking about, you never know what you get until you ask. If I never asked him, whatever, but now that I asked the question, he built us a prop and gives us his doors. It's beautiful. His trash becomes our treasure. It's beautiful. But it goes back to knowing your own territory. For us, that's a problem down in South Florida. We have some of the most reinforced construction down here between impact glass, CBS structures, reinforced overhead doors. For us, we need to know that because that's our first due territory. That's what we have to know. The traditional tactics that may work other places, they don't work too well down here in South Florida. You have to have a certain plan for them. So I'm glad you brought that up, Jess. I'm glad you brought up about having the conversation with the local industry, whether it's construction, demolition, whatever. I think that a lot of people would be surprised what they would get if they simply asked the question. And the last thing I'll say is this. My brother, Rusty, he works in Miami-Dade. He's a captain down there. And before he became the Venom 1 guy, which is living the dream right now, he was a captain in Liberty City for a little while, working with Bill Gustin. When Rusty was down there, he made friends with a lot of those demolition companies. And he would just ask those demolition companies and meet them and talk to them, get their contact information. After a while, he had a binder full of contacts for demolition companies. And they would call him sometimes. Hey, Russ, we got this structure we're about to tear down. Do you want to come out and train on it? Just because he asked. He developed that relationship with all these demolition companies, and he had them on a moment's notice. He had them on speed dial, basically. So to wrap this up, in terms of, knowing your own territory, asking the questions, you never know what you get if you ask. I think there's a lot of power there. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Jesse. I'm sorry to go off on a tangent like that, but going back to company training, that's what we're focused on right now. We're doing a RIT training right now, trying to get the whole department through some basic RIT training. Hopefully we'll finish it up before the end of the year. You're on mute, Brian. It's okay. Listen, we've been doing.
I was on mute. I was trying to write down. You were pontificating. I wasn't going to stop that. I was going to let it. I was like, he's got his pulpit out. So, no, I think there's a lot of great stuff. I was writing down notes like we always do on these things. And I think to your point, getting out as a company, one, get your company out from behind the firehouse doors, right? I mean, don't let them just sit there and rot. Like, get out and drive around. If nothing else, you're learning your first due area, and then stopping these local businesses. We had an example just last week. We're using a local motorcycle shop for their big back lot for a driver training. In numerous years past, we'd always gone out of town for our little cone course we have to do annually. But now we got a relationship with this local shop where they do their motorcycle training, and they're cool with us using that whenever we want. And so we're building upon that relationship with a community partner. And I think, the more of that stuff that you do, like you said, you don't know if you don't ask. I think that's important. To your point of getting to know the businesses, from us, from municipal fire department, getting in with our building department, understanding, hey, there's a demolition coming up at a home or something. To your point, yeah, we might not be able to burn it down, but if nothing else, even as dumb as it may sound, we can at least walk through it, open a wall up. I mean, just think about simple stuff like that goes a million miles when, fires are down in some areas. Hey, this is how we open a wall up. Just simple stuff like that. So thoughts on any additional thoughts on that stuff from Chief Shaw?
I would say takeaway number 43, based on what Chief Shaw just mentioned, is building those relationships with businesses in your community. I can't think of a fire chief across the United States that would say, no, we're not going to accept some doors or locks or some other item from a company that we are going to use for training and education purposes. I can't. Build those relationships, company officers. You don't need permission from your fire chief to go out in your district and talk to those businesses and ask, hey, do you have some things that we can use for training and education purposes?
Get them out. What are your thoughts on that? I'm sure you get out and about a lot. I can see you pilfering some job sites.
The garage door thing absolutely works.
Yeah.
And we have a garage door company that does the same thing. We go over there and ask them, and they're more than happy to share. And we take a lot.
Perfect. Well, I will wrap up with kind of my thought on a company drill, and it's real simple. For anybody who knows me, it's deploying hose lines. I think that's the fundamental aspect of the fire service for us is, there's two things that we need to know better than the regular person, and that's ladders and hose. Everything else is, they really don't know what it is, but everybody puts up some type of holiday lights or cleans a gutter, and everybody waters their lawn. So we need to do it better than they do it. So, I always go back to the simple stuff of the 1410 drills. If you've seen those before, if you haven't, just Google them. There's diagrams out there, and it's simple stuff. And it's just literally getting out of your firehouse, pulling up to a location and saying, hey, let's deploy X hand line, 1.5 inches, 3/4. We're going to deploy a 2.5. We're going to use our deck gun. We're going to make a hydrant connection. It's all those essential first due functionalities with water. And I think that those need to become more of a routine in today's fire service, not against the technical rescue and all the special operations stuff. I think it's fantastic. But I think, that the fundamentals of what we do when we say firefighter and fire rescue, fire department, fire district, doesn't matter. We got to be good at that aspect of it. So, I think that for me, at least, I think that should be a monthly activity in the fire service at the company level. Pick a day, pick some nice weather, get out. Everybody does it. Hey, I'm going to, as the company officer, I'm going to be the nozzle firefighter this time. You be the backstepper. You give me, incorporate everything we've talked about, Jesse's tick stuff, hey, get that in there, the size up, the building walkthrough. Hey, after we get done pulling this line through this building, let's go ahead and walk through it and learn what's on the inside. The RIT, we get a down firefighter in the side of this building. What are we going to do? How are we going to access them? What's the next thing? I think all those things play into it. So that for me, at least, is one of those drills, I think, that, takes maybe an hour or so to complete for everybody to run through, but I just think it builds that muscle memory that is just so critical. So we're rolling up. We got about 10 minutes left. Get some final thoughts from guys. Damon, final thoughts, or do you want to add to the 1410? Maybe we'll do a little discussion on the 1410 drills and then just kind of do a little wrap up.
You covered it. My final piece here, based on today's conversation, is that this continues to be a great profession. And so my challenge to you company officers out there and aspiring company officers, continue doing those things that will make this profession great long after we all leave here. And one of the things that makes it great is that it's fire service is built with is comprised of some very knowledgeable and talented individuals. And training and education has to be in the DNA and culture of every fire service organization in the world. Thank you, sir.
I like it. It's true. We got one of the greatest jobs in the world. We just got to not let it go past us, take advantage of every day and every minute we got doing it. So Jesse.
One quick thought on your 1410 drills, deploying the line, obviously an incredible skill to reinforce, but sometimes just as valuable as deploying the line is putting it back in service and making sure that we're clear on our hose loads and how those function and how getting those put back on properly helps us deploy them even a little bit better. So that was just my quick thought on that. Otherwise, I really enjoy the opportunity to be part of today's conversation. I think when it comes to company officers leading training, I think a fitting quote is that sometimes the simplest of deeds is greater than the grandest of intentions. So as an example, something with building construction, just talking about one simple construction feature, walking into your apparatus bay and looking at anything that you see, a beam, a girder, steel truss, whatever, is sometimes more impactful and powerful than building a full-size replica out of popsicle sticks of some giant facility. So simplest of deeds, greater than grandest of intentions. And it's an incredible opportunity as a company officer to build your own skill set while you're doing ultimately what we're there for, which is serving not only our community, but the people that we work with as well.
I think it's a critical points, to get out there, so one of the things I always say is the basics are the basics, but the basics aren't easy. And I think that's the case, both in training as well as development of trainings. We don't have to get these, not all of us are going to have access to a full blown fire tower and everything, or access to a ton of money for props. If you looked at all the drills we went through today, very little funding was required for them to get them completed. But I think as a company officer, one of the critical things we have to do is not be afraid to push our crews outside that firehouse and make them train. People want to genuinely be led, and that's leadership is getting uncomfortable with the activities of your company. So, Brian, what are your thoughts?
Well, the thing I like about the 1410 is that, it's a standard set of drills with the standard objective and then a time. So it's not me, it's not my standard. It's not the Brian Zaitz standard. It's the national standard. Now we can choose to exceed that. If the line pulling is 3 minutes and our company does it in 2:30 and we're like, that's not satisfactory to us, we want it 2:15. Well, we can do that. But then as an organization, if you want to compare, A shift station 2 to, C shift station 4, the standard's there. It's not, they're one thing or another. It's the standard. Like, can you do this in a 3 minute time frame? So there's a standard way to deploy it. There's a standard way to evaluate the time, and it needs all your members are actually engaged, because you need your backstep guy to do a good job. You need your driver to do a good job. The company officer needs to do a good job to get that time. So you're engaging every member of the company. So I think the 1410 drills are an excellent baseline if you're just trying to do some basic company drills.
And everybody, I think, knows that 2 house is always a little bit slower than 4 house. So that's correct.
2 house is where it's at, man.
All right, Chief Shaw, what do you got?
So the last thing, as we're wrapping up here, I remember my time as a company officer, and as much as I love being an assistant chief now and supporting the training of the training bureau and whatnot, I think the most influential time I had was as a company officer. And I think the smartest thing I did is when I first took on my own firehouse. I was there for 3 years prior to going to training. It was day one. I said, guys, we are going to train every day. It was a flat statement. We will train every day. Now, whether that's a 10-minute in service, looking over a piece of equipment, or an 8-hour out of service, acquired structure, live burn, we will train. We will do something every day. And the initial looks were like, oh my God, this guy's crazy. This guy does he not know where we work? We have the busiest rescues in the known universe. Oh my gosh. But it was a standard. They knew it was coming. It built a lot of relationships. It built a lot of confidence. It built a lot of memories. And even now, when I look at my walls and I look at the teams that on my walls right here of all the groups I was with, those are some strong memories. And even today, when I see those guys out in the field, now that they're promoted or whatever, they're officers, they remind me, you know what? As much as we hated to train sometimes, I'm glad you did it. I'm so glad that we trained with you. I'm so glad that we went over those reps over and over again. I'm so glad you drug me out of my room to pull a line. I'm so glad you involved us as a team to train. We made it local. We made it very individualistic to the areas we were dealing with, and we just did it all the time. And it was a tremendous team builder. It was a tremendous confidence builder, and I'm glad that I did it. I think that for company officers listening, there's a lot of power. There's a lot of opportunity and power to lead through training as a company officer at that level. So I hope and everybody here is a person that can help out with that. If they ever want to reach out to us or following at this, ask ideas or get printouts of what we do, we're here for them, But we all definitely support that. And I remember it with a lot of good memories. So.
Yeah, I always say that the company officer role is probably one of the best and funnest roles I had in the fire service, and I probably cut it short, but it was a great time. So as we wrap up today, I reiterate the same thing these gentlemen all said. Hopefully you guys walked away here with some 5 drills. We had Jesse with the thermal imaging, the basics of going to your station, turning your thermal imaging on, going through your modes, and understanding your thermal imaging, setting a small burn barrel in the back, understanding convection, conduction, radiation, all those things, and how fire and heat flow. We had Damon talk a little bit about HighRise and how important HighRise is for a firefighting aspect. It's one of those high risk, low frequency events for most of us. And so, starting out that policy manual and getting that SOG, SOP, or whatever you refer to it as, and reading that first, and then getting into these buildings and understanding the systems and suppression. Brian gave us some good tips on size up and understanding the importance of size up, not just conducting it once, but getting those sets and reps, especially as all these organizations across the country are seeing a influx of retirements and a newer generation of firefighters coming on board. It's our job as instructors, training officers, company officers, to train those people, right? So somebody's there to take our job when we retire and walk off the job. Chief Shaw shared with us his thoughts on RIT. We all know the importance of RIT on the fire ground. And so, whether we have dedicated companies that are responding as RIT companies, or we're operating as a RIT company, even as the second do, because the first 2 had something tragically go wrong, the importance of that critical skill sets for us as the fire service, and getting out there and practicing those RIT drills. And then the basics of just the 1410 drills, right? Those NFPA 1410 hose line deployment drills, and how critical those are for our success on the fire ground, and getting that fast water first is a good thing. So appreciate all you guys on here today. You guys, colleagues, friends. I'm lucky to call you guys friends in the fire service. I talk to you guys quite often, and share ideas, bounce ideas. I think that's another part of being a company officer, is developing a network of people to bounce ideas off of. I can tell you that I am the least smart guy on this call right now. And so, but I have all these guys' knowledge, because I can call any one of these 4 guys on this call right now and ask them a question and get an answer. So that's what it's all about. It's not about being the smartest person. It's about knowing where to get that information. And so as a company officer, build that network. So I would also encourage everyone to join the ISFSI. If you're a company officer and you're not a member of the International Society of Fire Service Instructors, I would definitely say you're kind of cutting yourself short. You have access to all these gentlemen on this call. We're all members, and there's an incredible network of professionals out there. So join the ISFSI, start writing for fire engineering, and hopefully we'll see everybody at FDIC in April of 2023. All right, guys, thank you very much. Take care.